I'm now delighted to introduce you to Carol Dumarchi-Sarvas, who is the Executive Director at Global Association Health for Animals, for his view on the world picture for animal medicines. Carol, over to you.
Thank you very much, Dawn, and hello everybody and good afternoon. You'll see from my title slide that I'm going to be talking about a global vision. So I might be moving quite a lot away from the UK, but I certainly have British examples in my presentation. So let me first say what Health for Animals is. If you could go to the next slide, please. So Health for Animals, as Dawn said, is the global association of animal health companies. We represent the 10 largest operators in the world, and those are the logos you see on the right. Most of you will recognize them. And that's we also include 20 and represent 29 regional and national associations. The bits in red there, and you'll note in Africa there's a lot of not a lot of red on that map, but we do in fact have quite a lot of work we're doing in Africa, but not through formal associations. And these companies produce everything in animal health: vaccines, antiparasiticides, diagnostics, digital devices and services, and antibiotics, of course. And we estimate that covers about 85% of the global operations of sales around the world. So next slide, please. So what I think I'd do today is to quickly take you through what we're doing in prevention around the world and what we see. But maybe just before I do that, to give you some insights onto what we see as the foundation for sustainable growth. And much of what we do as an industry, I think, is focused on that sustainable growth and making, and especially the sustainable bit. So I don't have to repeat a lot of these things for this audience because you know most of this, but maybe just drawing out just the week after COP that healthier animals do have a much lower greenhouse gas footprint or emissions footprint. And I think that's an important point, which people often forget. And from an economic point of view, of course, if animals are healthier, they are more productive, they are more valuable from an economic perspective. Disease prevention is increasingly, I think, in our industry, the starting point for the growth of both the sector and of its clients. And if you look at the animal health portfolio over the last few years, this really has shifted quite a lot. Investments into prevention have become, as I said, probably the foundation for the coming decade. And the market share of vaccines is growing. I'm going to show you some data further on. Maybe finally on this slide, products and services are growing rapidly as well. But this is very much something that we see in the sophisticated and more developed markets, and the challenge is to get that into the emerging and developing markets. I'll come back to that as well. So let's move to the next slide, where I'm going to just mention 6 different major innovation areas. Most of them on the slide here are areas which allow for much more targeted and optimized and responsible use of antibiotics. We have a wonderful publication out on our website called the Innovation Report, which goes into great depth about all of these new major areas of innovation and technology. I'm not going to pull out anything specific here, any of them specifically right now, because that can come up in the questions, depending on people interested in it. But maybe just one example. And in the diagnostics area, there's a huge amount of emphasis and investment in the diagnostics area. And the diagnostics companies and the components of the companies I represent in diagnostics are some of the fastest growing units in the sector. And of course, new vaccines, the mRNA vaccine, everybody will have heard that by now after 2 years of 1.5 years or so of COVID. But those exist as well in animal health, and there are so many more other examples. Alternatives to traditional antibiotics is an interesting phraseology. Of course, there is no alternative to traditional antibiotic, but there's lots of research there. Difficult area because all the low-hanging fruit has already been plucked. And then finally, in nutrition, I think that's an area where there is a huge amount of work going on in all kinds of fields for better nutrition, but also for more efficient nutrition, also focus on nutrition on feed, which leads to less outputs and lower methane levels. And in all of these 6 areas, you're going to see a lot more activity in the coming years. Predictive technologies, I didn't mention that's on the slide, but that and the previous speakers did mention that a little bit. That's particularly an area where we see, I think, some of the fastest growth, certainly in revenues. So moving on to the next slide, and just before you do move on, all of that information is available in great depth in that report, which I'll come back to in the last slide as well. So let's talk about prevention. In prevention and antibiotics, in 2019, we at a global level, and I have to emphasize that all of the manufacturers that we represent, 85% of the sector, have produced a roadmap. There's a link there when you get this presentation, I'm sure you will, where we set out 25 different actions on what we as an industry would do between 2019 and 2025 in a whole range of areas to reduce the need to use antibiotics. And I'm happy to say today, and obviously today because it's the Ruma conference, but also because it's the World Antibiotic Awareness Week, we have issued this morning our progress report on that. So that's a midterm report where we go through 25 of the actions that we set out. And I've just put on the slide, you see just 5 or 6 of them, 5 of them, the progress that we have on the 25 indicators that we set out. I want to emphasize something here. We are the only sector in the world who has done this. We're the only sector who said is what we're going to achieve, and now how far we are in achieving it, and how we're doing on that. And I think that's an example to follow for some other industry groups. The examples on the slide, for example, I can't see the slide myself very well from here, but I think the first one is investment in research and development, where we looked at what the total amounts are that we would be investing in R&D between now and 2025. And I'm happy to say we're on track there with over 3 billion over the last 3 years. Still got some time to go, so we'll probably surpass that 10 billion number. And remember, that's only the number of the 10 companies that we represent. Other areas, new diagnostics, we've already delivered 17 out of 20 tools. New vaccines, we've delivered more than half of them that we said we would. So these targets might need to be adjusted upwards. But and again, I do encourage you to go and look at that report. It's on our website, progress report. Maybe moving on to the next slide. A few comments about markets and investing in prevention. Firstly, as I'm sure you've heard a number of times today in the conference, in the last talk that was mentioned, there have been dramatic reductions over the last decade or so in the use of antibiotics. 34% global reduce in per kilo of animal antimicrobial between 2015 and 2017, according to the OIE. And that's old data. They're crunching their new numbers right now, and I am told that those reductions are even going further. But also, I think it's good to call out major markets such as the UK, which we've heard 50%, 53% in France, 36% in the United States, 34% on average in animal agriculture in Europe. These are not small reductions. These are not small reductions, and these are the types of reductions that hopefully we can see in the future in the human health side as well. Maybe if you look to the right, there's a little graphic of product categories, and you see that the orange one, which is going up, that's vaccination, and the black one at the bottom is the one that's going down, is sales product category. This is for Europe for antibiotics. So you see a great correlation between the reduction of antibiotics sales and the increase of vaccination and other products, and that's directly correlated, obviously. Let's move on to the next slide, please. Maybe a few comments about how the industry is doing overall. Some people will say, oh, those antibiotic sales are going down, so you mustn't be doing very well. Well, here are the overall market or actual trends of the last 20 years or so, 15 years of the 5 largest animal health companies. And what you see is close to double-digit growth this year, last year. And I've seen a lot of data for this year. It's from many companies, double-digit growth. So that's outperforming the market. And we see a lot of robust investment from the investment community and finance community in animal health. And the reason for that is there's lots of reasons for it. But vaccination is one of them. I think another one is trust that the market is moving in the right way. Let's move on. Next slide, please. So 4 megatrends. The first one I'll skip over because you've seen that one, but maybe just to emphasizing climate change. This is the obvious megatrend, which is really causing, particularly in some parts of the world, huge challenges for farmers, and we have to take that into account. What you also see, the next trend is that developing markets are increasingly putting requirements on production in emerging markets. So that's fine, but if you do that, there's a reason there are emerging markets and developing markets. And there's a growing pushback right now because there's a lot of countries feeling there are a lot of instructions coming from global groups and entities and so on, but very, very little financial support. And I think Dave and Sally said it, very little financial support to farmers. And that needs to change. So we do need to see a rise in investment in global agriculture. That is happening, but a lot of that needs to happen in the animal health, in the animal side. Remember, it's 40% of agriculture in the world, and only 20% of the funds go there. So let's move to the next slide, please. So what I'd like to do is just dwell a little bit on six kind of observations for the future. What we're going to see is a growing portfolio of innovative products. Most of them focused on prevention, and as I said, antibiotics are a declining market segment. A lot of them, this should be focused on disease avoidance, better returns for farmers. If you look at the investments which are happening, a lot of the investment in the animal health community is also going into companion animals. This is a very fast-growing segment. Indeed, when I started this position a number of years ago, I think 60% of the sales were in livestock and 40% in companion animals, and it's almost the other way around right now, globally, more or less. And that's important. Also, major growth areas are digital and data. And I think we can talk about that more if people are interested. There will be major acquisitions in those areas, and that's happening. And maybe turning to barriers, though, we have quite a full report. I say full, what I mean is lengthy report on our website, which I'll give a link to on the next slide, to the many significant barriers that exist to increase vaccination. And this is a fundamental problem. We actually identified 80 reasons that people are not investing, or that there are barriers to investment in and uptake of the vaccines and vaccination. And we obviously gave the solutions as well. This is an area which requires a lot more attention from governments and from stakeholders. I must say, I think it is happening. I have weekly conversations at FAO level now on these things. But it's a serious problem. There are major barriers to vaccination. What we also see, and that's very difficult to say, but we see a real divide between developed and emerging markets and developing markets, where all of these technologies are not really being taken up in many of the developing markets, maybe with the exception of some of the digital applications, particularly using smartphones. And what we need there is a much bigger investment, I think, also from the public side, but also from the private side, and awareness of the need to invest in these technologies. And then, obviously, this shift away from antibiotics and toward prevention. And we will give a final update in 2023 before delivering our results in 2025. Lastly, I think one of the trends we're seeing is the need for farmers to be able to show that they're delivering for sustainable production. more efficient, sustainable production and One Health. And that's certainly an area from the animal health company side where we see a lot of investment and a lot of interest from farmers. And then turning to the last slide, please, which is nothing more than just a reference to the 4 or 5 different papers which are on the themes that I talked about in great depth on our website. Environment, sustainability. There's a new one there, which is a paper we've just shared with the global decision-making community at IGOs. And so do take a look at those. And with that, I think I'm 5 seconds over, Madam Chair. Thank you very much to Ruma, and thank you to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carol. That was great. And finally, I would like to invite Christine Middlemas, the UK's Chief Veterinary Officer, who will put the UK's credentials on animal health and welfare into an international context. So Christine, over to you.
Sorry, you think I would have learned that by now. Yes, good afternoon, everybody. It's good to be here and join the Ruma conference again. I'm going to be talking, I think, on the theme, really continuing the theme we've heard already this afternoon from Carell there and Dame Sally and Scott, thinking about more about disease prevention and identifying new and emerging diseases and working in an integrated approach around that. Rather than more specifically thinking about actually reducing use of antibiotics, that not needing to use them in the first place. And since we last came together in a Ruma conference, of course, for the UK context has slightly changed as we are no longer members of the EU and now have UK sovereignty. And that's enabled us to develop and start thinking about really our own specific SPS strategy, so sanitary and phytosanitary strategy, and how we want to position ourselves in the world in relation to animal health, One Health, and sustainable food production. If we can have the next slide, please. So we've heard a lot about this from speakers already. AMR, as we know, is absolutely critical for health, but also for those underpinning things that benefit our health, our food safety and security. And we know that it's not going to be about not using medicines at all. It's going to be about having the availability of critical medicines when they're really needed in both the animal and human health world. And Ruma have always been strongly supportive, as am I, about having the right medicines in the right place at the right time when you really, really need them. It's not about not having any medicines and not using any medicines at all. I think one of the things coronavirus has made us reflect on is just how fragile our supply chains can be, both in terms of food, but also medicines. We recognise that there are incongruities in our supply chains. For example, we rely on some specific key products or components of key products coming from some specific countries. And that makes them very fragile and very vulnerable. And we need to move to a basis where we have more sustainable supply chains, but also affordable supply chains for people around the world so that everyone can have fair access both to safe, healthy food and safe and healthy medicines. And I think that's real what we were hearing from Dame Sally and Scott about how you achieve that and that balance internationally. And so I want to talk about and reflect on how the UK fits into that. And one of the ways this year specifically has been having the lead of the G7, where we had 2 tracks running, a medicine track, not a medicine track, a One Health track, and an environment track. And animal health fitted into both of those. So One Health thinking very much about pandemic preparedness, so that early warning, having diagnostics, an integrated approach across environment, animal health and public health. And I truly believe that an integrated approach, and that which is what we're moving to practicing in the UK, is absolutely vital. It's more than collaboration, because the risk pathways and the pathogens we very often share. So we have to work in an integrated way, which is actually just what we're doing in the avian influenza outbreak that we're managing just now, H5N1. We have the European strain of it, not the Asian strain that previously has been shown to have pretty impactful zoonotic effects. And at our daily meetings, we join with public health colleagues attend, food safety colleagues attend from all administrations, so that we're all hearing the up-to-date information together at the same time and making critical decisions together. And working more in that way will become of ongoing importance. And we held a G7 Chief Veterinary Officers meeting, which I was pleased to be able to chair, with the G7s and other invited countries, to really talk more about how we build our surveillance and sharing of disease intelligence and surveillance globally, that information and intelligence that we all need to act on, without it impacting on trade and posing trade barriers. And underpinning all that, of course, as we know, is the emergence of zoonotic disease in humans. Many have an animal origin, and many existing human infectious diseases are zoonotic. Next slide, please. We've had some fantastic achievements in the UK, as we know, through reducing antibiotic use in both animals and people. But of course, unsurprisingly, I'm going to focus on the animals. Recognising now that it's not all the fault of the animals. Our actual antibiotic use in food-producing animals in the UK is much less than that of humans and pets. Pets being an area that we haven't hugely focused on in the past, but an area of increasing activity and work, recognising, especially after coronavirus, how many households now have pets and how close those interactions between the people and the animals are, and understanding what potential risks that might create for us. Fantastically, we've had a great reduction in the use of critically important antibiotics, and that's now a very low level of our overall antibiotic sales. But there's more to do. So in effect, we've captured the low-hanging fruit about reducing actual use, and really where we're needing to focus is reducing disease levels. So we don't need to use antibiotics in the first place. But that's a bit more difficult to achieve than the actual just stopping, reducing use in the first place. And so some of the things we're going to go on to talk about is UK role in that and how we are doing that. Next slide, please. We also see, and I talked about the G7, and of course we've had COP26, we also see that we can influence and be ambassadors for good practices that we've learned or tested ourselves. This is not about telling others how to do things, absolutely not, because each country, their animal populations, the diseases they face and have to manage are different. But there are certainly key lessons that we've learned in our approach. As we know, we took a non-regulatory approach to reducing antibiotic use that we can share with other countries. And talking about that and evidencing that is a really important part of the UK brand, about saying our food and our approaches are safe, and we want to work with others in that space. And so we're really pleased to be supporting through the different forums, G7, G20 and so on, what was the tripartite but now has expanded to include UNEP, which is the environmental agency under the UN, really, really important partner to support them in leading all countries in their approaches, again, and being able to flex them to meet their requirements. And we'll talk more in further slides about some of the initiatives that we're leading in that space. And one of the key pieces of work, and again, the global leaders that Sally and Scott are part of, which is a really influential and important group. I'm pleased to say that Mark Shipp, the CVO from Australia, is often represents Australia in it, so it has other veterinary support. Are really doing a huge amount to influence the reducing use of growth promoters worldwide. Next slide, please. So the Biosecurity Toolkit, and for me, this applies not just at country level, It applies at consignment level, so relevance to trade, and how we assure and verify the product that we're sending around the world is safe to eat, safe to trade. It applies at farm level, and indeed it applies at individual animal level. And the toolkit for me it is a number of measures across that prevent, prepare, detect, respond, and recover space. And there's lots of work, and it's not rocket science to understand that investing in prevent is going to pay much more dividend than investing in respond and recover. Although you have to look at those areas, obviously, you can't just focus on one area and not across the spectrum. But really, that prevention and preparation and detection are the key in the first place. And the things that underpin that for me, and where I think we have a lot to offer globally, as well as working in the UK, is in our science base. We have a very strong animal health science base, not just from government, but from many other partners. Look at Morden, for example, here in Scotland, a membership organisation supported by farmers, looking at tackling many of the knotty endemic disease issues we have. But science really supporting the development and focusing a lot now on accurate and rapid testing. So important to know what pathogen are we dealing with, and do we have a validated test so that if I use that test out in the field, here in the UK, somewhere else globally, it's going to detect the pathogen. We're going to know what we're dealing with and be able to take appropriate action. And then whole genome sequencing to support that, so we can look at changes and trends and understand more what is happening in terms of pathogen development. And again, referring to the highly pathogenic avian influenza H5N1, that's how we know we've got the European strain and not the Asian strain. Surveillance, of course, therefore, and knowing what pathogens are out there and where to target our prevention and preparation is really important. And one of the things is building up that global picture of surveillance. Country focus is important, but we need to build our global picture so we understand when trends change. There's a place for legislation and biosecurity where you want everybody to take action to prevent or eradicate disease. Communication is so important, and we've heard from the previous speakers about behaviour change, and communication with the support of Ruma, I think, is something that we've done very well, but continue to develop, particularly through social media. Assurance and verification is really important. Having veterinary services that can assure and verify for trade partners and others that, yes, that product we're sending you meets the requirements that we agreed, and being able to audit that. And finally, and probably most importantly, and Ruma demonstrates as well, it's about relationships. And in developing Ruma, in developing these One Health relationships across government and working with industry as we do in partnerships, I think that has been a big part of what we've achieved. But we need to think beyond, and how we're going to use that in actual endemic disease control and prevention. And that's why we're working through our animal health, animal pathway development that we're doing under the in the next steps of the Rural Development Programme. Next slide, please. So again, those key parts, and to note that everybody has a role in good disease control and biosecurity prevention, whether it's in wildlife, and that is important in some places, farmed animals, and the governance about shared ownership and informed decision making at farm level, at regional level, and then at national level. Working with vaccine manufacturers, supporting them where there's gaps and there is cost benefit or market public good to be gained from those, that we have the right mechanisms to support vaccine development. And the UK leads the secretariat of the global science group that brings together scientists and manufacturers to look at those first steps in vaccine development where there may be a public good for the product, and we need to work together to gain that benefit before we get to production. Next slide, please. And as I said, we've been developing a future SPS strategy for the UK, very much building on our science base, being risk-based, targeted, pragmatic across all our SPS activities. So maximising opportunities for UK businesses in that space where we have low risk and we do things well, and able to demonstrate that to others. But particularly using our science and international leadership to build relationships Often we have a number of OIE collaborating centres where we share expertise with other countries to help them develop their lab basis, their veterinary services, and so on, and learn from each other. And it's a really critically important part of developing global capability to deal with disease. For those of you at London Vet Show last week, the session I did with Clara from Brook, a recognition from Brook is the need to build veterinary services from farm right through the system, not just governments, but vets on the ground and things, and paraprofessionals, veterinary systems to help support animal keepers in their disease management. Next slide, please. So what's our UK USP? Absolutely about enhancing productivity through improved animal health. So less of a focus, I mean, very much encompassing the focus on reducing antibiotic use, but it's about really good health and improved productivity, not just making more, but making as much from perhaps less inputs. How we use that to improve our access to export markets, and also lead and influence globally so that we can achieve a better world and that sustainable food supply system that we want for everybody. Next slide, please. So recognising our UK success story internationally and using it to influence and help others, but not preach. And through FAO, they have recognised and have been using to understand and share some of the efforts and our approaches of that multi-collaborative approach that we've need, and sharing that wider globally with other countries. And thinking about how we then achieve that sustained behavioural change by working together. I'll come back to it. Yes, it's working together in the UK, but working together in that global context for animal health, which has always been trade focused, but we need to focus it more on sustainable approaches. And as I've referenced, the One Health approach, hugely important for me. Next slide, please. So I'll finish there. Recognise I've gone over time, but this is an important subject and I could talk about it lots and lots because it stimulates lots of ideas, especially after the previous really enlightening and insightful speakers. But I'll stop there and hand back to Dawn. Thank you very much.